Today, I'm going to explain a fantasy, horror, and mystery film called Sleepy Hollow. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. One stormy night, Peter Van Garrett is riding his carriage through the fields when a mysterious galloping follows him. He hears a thick cutting sound and looks outside the window only to see his driver beheaded. He jumps out of the carriage and runs through the field. He stops and sees a scarecrow and hears something approaching him. When he turns around, a scythe comes down and cuts off his head. In 1799, in New York City, police constable Ichabod Crane finds a floating corpse in the city river. They take the corpse to the prison to burn despite Ichabod's protest to properly rule out the man's death. Ichabod's strict belief in science and his relentless pursuit of justice is strongly resented among his peers, and he is soon sent to a small town called Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of murders. As he travels to his new assignment, he reflects on his scarred hands and thinks about what the town has in store for him. When Ichabod arrives, he senses the town's fear and paranoia. He walks up to a big house and ignores a couple making out in the shadows outside. He accidentally interrupts a party game while looking for the head of the house and receives a kiss from the daughter, Katrina Van Tassel, and meets her hostile suitor, Brom Van Brunt. Ichabod introduces himself to Katrina's father, the wealthy businessman, Baltus Van Tassel, and meets his second wife, Mary Preston, now known as Lady Van Tassel. The Van Tassels let Ichabod board with them for the remainder of his stay in Sleepy Hollow. As he unpacks his luggage in his room, a maid named Sarah tells him how thankful she is that a constable has arrived. He is invited by Van Tassel to his private study and meets the town elders, the local doctor, Dr. Thomas Lancaster, the magistrate, Samuel Phillips, and notary, James Hardenbrook. Ichabod lays out the details of the case. 3 people have been murdered: Peter Van Garrett, his son, Dirk Van Garrett, and the widow Winship. All 3 were found decapitated. The town elders inform Ichabod that the heads of the corpses were never recovered. They believe that it's been taken by the Headless Horseman. The Horseman was a Hessian mercenary from the Revolutionary War who loved carnage and rode a giant black steed named Daredevil. He sharpened his teeth to add ferocity to his appearance and rode his horse hard into battle, chopping off the heads of his enemies. The Hessian didn't meet his end until one winter in 1779 when his steed was shot near Western Woods, just next to Sleepy Hollow. The soldiers chase him into the woods where he meets 2 little girls gathering firewood. One of the girls makes a noise that alerts the soldiers to his location. The girl looks on as her sister runs away, watching the soldiers fight the Hessian and eventually chop off his head with his own sword. They buried him in an unmarked spot deep in the woods, and for 20 years, his spirits have haunted the place ever since. The town elders believe that the horseman is chopping off any head that he sees on sight. Ichabod is skeptical and they hand him a Bible to read. He notices that there's a family tree of the Van Garretts and Van Tassels inside the book. Later that night, one of Van Garrett's servants, Jonathan Masbeth, guards the edge of the town against the horseman. As he aims his gun at the fog, he sees something sinister. A shot is fired, a horse neighs, and seconds later, Jonathan is running through the woods from the Headless Horseman. The Hessian soon catches up to him and his sword cuts off Jonathan's head in one clean slice. The next morning, Ichabod sees Mr. Killian, who lends him a horse named Gunpowder. He also meets Mr. Killian's family, his wife who serves as a midwife, Beth, and their son, Thomas. Just then, the locals fire a gun to alert the townsfolk of another murder. Ichabod arrives at the crime scene and sees that the town elders have already gathered around the body. They inform the constable about the victim, Jonathan Masbeth. Ichabod reprimands them for moving the body and raises the question as to why the Hessian is taking the heads with him if the body is easily identifiable. Usually, heads are taken so that the body will not be identified. He continues to investigate the scene and brings out his own scientific contraptions, noting that the wound cauterized immediately, which means the flame must have been burning red hot. The town elders shiver at the grisly thought. Later that day, the town holds a funeral for Jonathan. Ichabod takes the orphaned young Masbeth under his wing and service. As the others leave, the magistrate Phillips approaches Ichabod and tells him that Jonathan was the 5th victim and not the 4th. There are 5 victims buried in 4 graves? Suddenly, Ichabod has an idea and orders Masbeth to wake him before dawn. When the dawn comes, Ichabod, together with Masbeth, exhumes all 4 bodies. As he investigates widow Winship's corpse, he notices an incision on her stomach. He takes the corpse to the town doctor's office and inspects it. He raises the question as to why the horseman would cut off her head and stab the widow in the stomach as well. Ichabod ushers them out as he investigates further. Hours later, A bloody Ichabod emerges from the room and announces to the town elders that Widow Winship was with child by the time she was murdered. Evening comes and Ichabod crosses the town bridge with his horse, Gunpowder. He hears a sound and sees the headless horseman at the end of the bridge. He runs away from the Hessian and into the woods. He stops and looks around and the horseman throws at him a blazing pumpkin head. Unbeknownst to him, the Hessian was fake, for it was only Brom dressed up as the horseman, playing a cruel prank on him. At night, Ichabod dreams of his mother. He remembers her drawing circles near the hearth and tucking him in bed with his favorite red cardinal paper toy. He also remembers a horrible man lurking in the shadows. When Ichabod wakes up, he goes downstairs to get a glass of water. He hears a sound and catches Katrina reading by the fire. He learns from Katrina that her own mother died 2 years ago and the lady who nursed her is now her stepmother, Mary Preston, now the Lady Van Tassel. He asks her why nobody brought up the fact that the Van Tassels are related to the Van Garretts. Katrina says it's because everyone in Sleepy Hollow is related to each other either by blood or marriage. She then tells her how her father had come to this place as a poor man. Van Garrett had set him up with a broken down cottage and an acre. Her father worked hard, prospered, and gave her the life she had today. Katrina then gives him a book of spells to protect him before taking him down to the old cottage where they used to live. When they arrive, Katrina notices the scars on Ichabod's hands. She takes him to the old fireplace and starts drawing on the ashes. He gasps as he sees that it's the same symbol from the one his mother drew in his dreams. She then shows him the carving of an archer deep into the fireplace, saying that the carving was already there before they even moved in. Ichabod then shows her his red cardinal paper toy. Separate pictures that become one once you spin them fast enough. Later that night, Ichabod eavesdrops as the town elders hold a secret meeting. It seems like the magistrate Phillips has packed his luggage and is to set out of town. He follows the magistrate and stops him by the fields. Ichabod confronts him about the widow Winship and her child. It turns out the widow had sought out his help to protect the rights of her child, and so he was bound by oath to keep that secret. Phillips knows who the father of the child is and reassures him that it was the horseman who killed her. Feeling frustrated, Ichabod denies the existence of the horseman. Suddenly, their conversation is cut short by the bleating of goats. Phillips gasps as he sees the shadow of a Hessian galloping towards them. The magistrate tries to run away, but the horseman catches up to him and chops off his head. Ichabod falls to the ground as Phillips's head rolls towards him. The Hessian runs towards him and takes the head with his sword just before Ichabod faints. When Ichabod wakes up, Van Tassel, Katrina, and young Masbeth visit him. He is hysterical as he tells them that the horseman really does exist before fainting again. He dreams of his mother again, and this time they are playing in the forest as it snows. The dream suddenly turns dark as a young Ichabod witnesses her mother getting abused by the horrible man. Ichabod wakes up and announces to the town elders that he will go to the western woods today and look for the horseman's grave. He ends up going with only the young Masbeth. He learns that Masbeth's father worked for the Van Garretts and that one particular thing happened a week before the Van Garretts' deaths. An argument erupted between the father and son, and later Masbeth's father was sent for by Mr. Van Garrett. They continue their journey into the woods and stop near a trail leading into a cave. As they get nearer, they hear the voice of a woman and Ichabod takes out his gun. They slowly walk into the cave and see a veiled woman living there. Ichabod quickly realizes that she is a witch. The witch takes Ichabod with her and orders Masbeth to go outside. She lets him sit at her table as she chains herself up and prepares a ritual. He asks about the horseman and if there's any way to stop him. The witch tells him to shut up and the room grows silent. Suddenly, the witch lunges at him with eyes and tongue gouging out of her face. In a hoarse voice, she commands him to follow the Indian trail right to where the sun dies, where they will find the tree of the dead and climb down to the horseman's resting place. Ichabod breaks free from the witch's clutches and flees with Masbeth. They take their horses to search for the tree of the dead. They soon stop on their trails and Ichabod jumps off his horse with his gun to hunt a shadow. He spots a white horse and its rider, Katrina, who followed them into the woods. Their conversation is then cut short by Masbeth, who leads them to a gigantic twisting tree in the middle of the woods. They finally found the tree of the dead. Ichabod starts chopping the roots and finds them full of blood. He continues chopping until the roots open up and reveal a hiding place full of severed heads. Ichabod concludes that the tree must be the gateway between two worlds. He jumps up the tree and starts digging on the hill. He uncovers the Hessian's skeleton, but the skull is gone. He tells them that this must be why the horseman keeps taking heads. He will not stop until his own head is returned to him. All of a sudden, a rumbling comes from the pile of severed heads. Ichabod, Katrina, and Masbeth look on in terror as the pile of heads open up, and out comes the giant steed, Daredevil, and his rider, the headless horseman. The Hessian gallops away in search of his next victim and Ichabod quickly follows him. The horseman arrives at the Killian's house and quickly eliminates Mr. Killian. Beth manages to hide Thomas under the basement and hides in the corner of the room as the murderer walks in with her husband's head. She too is decapitated, and the horseman leaves no mercy even for little Thomas. Meanwhile, Brom, who's on guard duty for the night, hears the screams. He sees the horseman and fires at him, knocking him off his horse. The headless body makes its way towards him as he reloads his gun, but Brom manages to fight back. The Hessian throws a knife at Brom's knee, hindering his abilities. Ichabod arrives and tries to help his friend. He stabs the horseman in the back as they make a run for it across the bridge. As they turn around to look for their enemy, the horseman surprises them from the back and stabs Ichabod on the shoulder, then tosses him aside. He then lowers Brom into the bridge and fights him again, landing a few swings on him before finally cutting his torso in half. Ichabod looks up as he sees the headless horseman walking away before he faints again. Back at Van Tassel's house, Dr. Lancaster inspects Ichabod's wounds. The doctor is surprised that the wound has fared well and has bled very little. When Ichabod wakes up, he apologizes to Katrina right away to defend Brom. He then tells them that the horseman doesn't kill at random. Someone who's alive must have dug out the Hessian's skull and is using it to control him to do their bidding. His theory is dismissed as Katrina makes him drink a homebrewed potion. As Ichabod sleeps, he dreams of the horrible man again, but this time it's the headless horseman. He goes inside a red door to a room full of torture devices and accidentally stabs his hands into one of the devices before finding his mother dead with 1,000 holes stabbed into her. Ichabod wakes up and runs into Katrina's arm. He reveals to her that his mother was murdered by this father in an attempt to save her damned soul. He was only 7 years old when he lost her, and he lost her faith in religion as well. As Ichabod and Katrina grow closer together, they show their vulnerable side and express their attraction to one another. They soon share an intimate embrace. By the time Ichabod wakes up, he lays out the fact of the case with Masbeth. He thinks that there must be a conspiracy brewing amongst the town elders, for they were arguing on the night the magistrate was murdered. Ichabod then concludes to make a record of every man and woman in Sleepy Hollow, starting with the chief citizen, Lord Van Tassel. Masbeth agrees that Van Tassel must be the chief citizen now since the Van Garretts are dead. Suddenly, Ichabod has an idea and takes Masbeth with him to see the notary. When they arrive at Hardenbrook's office, Masbeth sees his father's satchel. They learn from the notary that since all of the Van Garretts is dead, the estate will pass on to the next of kin, which is the Van Tassels. Just then, Masbeth reveals a document from his father's satchel. It turns out that Peter Van Garrett created a new will, leaving his estate to the widow Winship. The two secretly married and left everything to their unborn child. Hardenbrook admits to being pulled in unwillingly into the plot. Ichabod concludes that Reverend Steenwick knew about the marriage because he performed the ceremony. Dr. Lancaster attended the pregnant woman, Magistrate Phillips gave protection of the law, and the notary Hardenbrook concealed the documents. The four elders had conspired to have Van Garretts and widow Winship eliminated so that there would be no more heirs to claim. Masbeth's father was drawn into the plot as he was the one who bore witness to Van Garrett's new will, ultimately leading to his death. This way the only one who will inherit Van Garrett's fortune is none other than Baltus Van Tassel himself. Ichabod returns to his room and finds Katrina, who inquires about the investigation. He refuses to tell her anything of importance and slips the will into his drawer. When she leaves, Masbeth finds a symbol drawn under Ichabod's bed, telling him that it's the evil eye and someone is casting spells against him. Later that night, Ichabod and Masbeth follow a hooded figure leaving the house and heading for the woods. Masbeth waits for him by a tree as he goes further. Hidden amongst the trees, Ichabod finds Lady Van Tassel making love with Reverend Steenwick, as she digs a dagger into her hand and wipes it onto the man's back. Ichabod and Masbeth return to the house immediately and find that the new will had been stolen. Ichabod rides to the old cottage and catches up to Katrina as she burns the will to protect her father. The two argue, conflicted about their feelings for one another and his sense of justice, and Katrina bids him goodbye. Ichabod talks to Lady Van Tassel, but Katrina still refuses to talk to him. She confronts him and tells him that she knows that he saw her last night. She then asks him to keep it from her husband. Just then, Lord Van Tassel enters the kitchen and tells them Hardenbrook has killed himself. Reverend Steenwick has called a meeting at the church where everyone will speak against Ichabod. As the townsfolk gather at the church, Van Tassel waits for his wife on his horse as she picks out some herbs for her wound. Suddenly, the headless horseman appears from behind the trees and chops off her head. Van Tassel arrives at the church and warns Katrina about the Hessian who had just killed her stepmother. They run inside the church as the horseman arrives. The headless murderer stops, for he cannot enter the inside of a church. The people start shooting at the Hessian through the windows while an argument ensues amongst the town elders. Van Tassel takes out his gun to defend himself as Dr. Lecanster starts confessing that the four of them were bewitched and were forced to plot against him. But before he could finish confessing, Reverend Steenwick hits him on the head and kills him. Van Tassel then fires his gun at the Reverend. He backs away and points out his gun, threatening everyone to stay back. Suddenly, the window breaks, and Van Tassel is harpooned out by the Headless Horseman. Katrina screams as his father is dragged out of the church and has his head cut off. She faints and Ichabod sees the pink chalk near her palm. It turns out that she was the one who drew the symbol under his bed. Ichabod and Masbeth take Katrina back to the house, but she hasn't woken up yet. Ichabod suspects that she is the one who has brought the horseman back to life. He calls for his carriage and prepares to leave. As he's passing through the village, he sees the townsfolk carrying Lady Van Tassel's body into the morgue. He opens the spell book that Katrina gifted him and learns that the symbol she's drawing wasn't the evil eye but a protection spell for loved ones against evil spirits. Ichabod knows he has to make things right and asks the carriage to turn back to the town. Ichabod heads the morgue and inspects Lady Van Tassel's corpse. It's just as he suspected. The cut on the hand was made when the body was already dead. This body was not Lady Van Tassel. Meanwhile, back at the house, Katrina faints after she sees her stepmother alive and well. Lady Van Tassel takes Katrina to an old windmill and unbeknownst to her, Masbeth follows them. She cuts a lock of her stepdaughter's hair and uses it in her spell. It turns out that it was Lady Van Tassel all along. She stole the horseman's head and had made a pact with the devil to bring the headless horseman back to life to do her bidding. She summons the Hessian from the tree of the dead one last time to kill Katrina. When Katrina wakes up, Lady Van Tassel reveals her true nature. She killed one of the maids, Sarah, and used her body to disguise her own death. Her real name wasn't Mary Preston, but it's Mary Archer. Her family lived in an old cottage and served the Van Garretts for years. When her father died, they got evicted and were outcasts living in the woods because her mother was suspected of witchcraft. After a year, her mother died and she and her sister were left to fend off for themselves. While gathering firewood, she witnessed the horseman's death and at that moment, she offered her soul to the devil to help her bring the Hessian back to life to avenge her. She killed the town elders and anyone who knew her plot, even her own sister, the witch who lived in the woods. She will kill the Van Garretts who starved her family and take their estate and kill the Van Tassels who stole their cottage. All that's left to do is kill Katrina and she will have everything she wanted. As Lady Van Tassel drones on, Masbeth creeps behind her with a hammer, but she turns to him and makes him drop the weapon. Katrina and Masbeth run out of the windmill just in time to meet up with Ichabod. The horseman drives them back up to the mill and they bar the doors. They climb up to the roof just as the Hessian knocks down the door. He chops down the ladder but Ichabod and the rest of the group make it to the roof. He drops a gaslight down to the mill, hoping to burn the horseman alive. The three grab hold of the windmill and jump as soon as they get near the ground. They run away just as the windmill erupts in an enormous blast of fire, but the headless horseman survives. The three ride the carriage and the pursuit continues. Katrina takes the reins as Ichabod shoots at the horseman. He's knocked down by a tree branch and is left riding the devil's steed. He jumps back to the carriage and pushes the horseman back to his own horse. As they're both dragged by their own horses, Ichabod makes his way back to the carriage and faces the horseman. A struggle ensues and the other two jump to the horses as the carriage breaks free. Ichabod grabs hold onto the reins as the carriage strays away and jumps into a ditch together with Hessian. Ichabod, Katrina, and Masbeth arrive at the tree of the dead and face Lady Van Tassel who shoots Ichabod on the chest. She grabs Katrina and orders the headless horseman to take her. Ichabod regains consciousness and realizes that the book of spells saved his life. He jumps at Lady Van Tassel who lets go of Katrina. The two stumble to the ground and struggle to get a hold of the horseman's skull. Meanwhile, Masbeth grabs a branch and knocks out Lady Van Tassel. The horseman grabs Katrina and is about to chop her head off when Ichabod grabs the skull and tosses it back to the Hessian. The horseman regains his head and the contract is broken. He is no longer under the wicked stepmother's bidding. Ichabod and Katrina embrace and he shows her how her gift has protected her. The Hessian, now with his head, takes Lady Van Tassel into his arms and gives her a bloody kiss. Lady Van Tassel realizes that she has lost. She screams as the horseman takes her into the tree of the dead into the depths of hell. The three look at the stepmother's remaining arm as they realize that it's finally over and Ichabod faints again. After a while, Ichabod marries Katrina and brings her, as well as Masbeth, to New York City, where they will live a new and blissful life.